My father called me 9 times in 3 weeks. I answered every one. Then in October, the calls stopped. Not slowed down, stopped. Just gone, like someone had pulled a cord out of the wall. The morning I drove 40 miles to his house, and my sister met me on the porch steps. With her arms folded, she said our father was too tired for visitors. I said he called me 9 times, Vonda. She said he's been confused since the stroke. You know how he gets. I stood on those steps for a moment, looked at the window behind her, where the curtain had moved, then turned around and got in my truck. I drove to the pilot station on Route 64 and sat in the parking lot with the engine running. Then I made one phone call. 6 weeks later, a county investigator showed up at a school ceremony in front of 200 people and found something my sister had spent 8 months trying to hide. It wasn't in a document. It wasn't in a bank statement. My father showed it to the room himself, with every one of those 200 people watching. But I need to take you back to October 1st, because nothing that happened at that ceremony makes sense without understanding what came before it. I'm 52 years old. I spent 20 years as a wildland firefighter, and the last 8 as a fire inspector for the county. I work out of a beige office building on Maple Street in Claymont, Tennessee, and I drive a county-issue pickup that smells like smoke and old coffee, no matter how many times I clean it. My name is Harlan. I grew up on 40 acres of family land outside of town, the kind of flat, quiet farmland that doesn't look like much until you understand what it took to keep it. My father is 80 years old. He spent 31 years as the principal of Claymont Elementary. If you grew up within 40 miles of here, there's a reasonable chance he was the man who called your parents when you got in trouble, or shook your hand at graduation, or drove the school van to the state science fair because the district couldn't afford a bus. He had a mild stroke 2 years ago. His speech slowed down. He takes longer to find words, sometimes backtracks mid-sentence, but he is sharp. He knows what day it is. He knows what's in his savings account. He knows exactly who I am every time I walk through the door, or he did when I was allowed to walk through the door. My sister Vonda is 47. She and her husband run a landscaping company on the east end of town. After Dad's stroke, she offered to move in temporarily, just until he got his footing back. Dad agreed. That was 18 months before October. What was supposed to be temporary had become something else, and I didn't understand what that something else was, until I started paying attention to the things I'd been choosing not to look at. I keep a spiral notebook in my truck. Red cover, carbon paper pages, the kind we used for incident reports when I was on the fire crew. Old habit. I started a new section in October with one line at the top, things that don't add up. Then I went back through the previous 6 months in my memory and started writing. Dad's last call to my cell was October 7th, a Tuesday. We talked for 11 minutes. Near the end, almost like he was sliding it into a normal conversation, he said, "Harlan, you still got that old survey map?" From when we were going to run the fence line, I told him I did. It was in the filing cabinet in my home office, going on 12 years. He said, "Good." And the conversation moved on. I wrote it down. October 7th asked about the survey map. We hadn't talked about that map since a boundary dispute with the neighboring property in 2012. There was no reason to bring it up now. I wrote it down because 20 years of reading fire behavior taught me that the things you can't explain are the ones you keep watching. Here's the part I have to be honest about, because it matters to everything that comes after. When Mom died in 2017, Dad leaned on my sister, not on me, on her. Part of that was geography. She lives 12 minutes from his house. I live 40 miles out. Part of it was temperament. She calls. She stops by. She brings casseroles. I'm not that kind of person. I show up when something's on fire, literally and otherwise, but I am not a dropper-by. After Mom went, I told myself Dad was in good hands. That was true for a while. And then, slowly, it became the story I was telling myself to avoid the part I didn't want to see. By the time I was sitting in that parking lot in October, it had been 22 days since my father had answered his own phone. I didn't drive home. I drove to Ida's house instead. Ida has lived in the house to the right of my father's for 18 years. She spent 30 years in the emergency room at Regional Medical before she retired. When I knocked on her door and asked if she'd seen my father lately, she was quiet for a moment before she answered. She said she hadn't seen him in the yard since July. Dad used to walk the property line every morning. Slow now, with his walker, but consistent. July was when it stopped. She had tried to wave him over from her driveway once, and my sister had come out instead, Told her dad wasn't up for socializing, that the doctor had him on a new medication that made him drowsy. But last week, Ida said, I saw him standing at the side window. She paused. He waved at me, real deliberate, like he wanted me to see him. What did you do? I asked. I waved back, she said. And then Vonda came around the corner of the house, and he stepped back from the glass. I sat with that. Ida, I said, have you ever seen anything through that window that concerned you? She looked at me for a long time. She said she'd seen my father sitting in his recliner on a weekday afternoon, and there had been something across his lap. She couldn't be certain. It might have been a lap blanket. She said it the way people say things when they want you to hear what they're not saying. I thanked her and got back in my truck. My son Seth is 27. He works as a staff accountant at a firm in Nashville and drives home on alternating weekends. He's methodical the way I'm methodical, not emotional about numbers, just careful with them. When he called me that Thursday evening, I was at the kitchen table with the notebook open. He'd been on Facebook and found a photo my sister posted the previous Sunday. Dad was in his recliner, hands folded in his lap, cardigan buttoned to the collar, in what looked like a 70-degree room. Look at his chair, Dad, Seth said. I spread my fingers on the photo. Dad's walker, the green one with the tennis ball feet that he has used every single day since the stroke, was folded up and leaning against the far wall, not next to the chair, not within arm's reach, 10 feet away against the wall. He can't get up without it, Seth said quietly. I knew that. Vonda knew that. The following morning I drove to see the family attorney, a man named Rick, who has handled my father's legal affairs for 25 years. I walked in without calling ahead. When I sat down and told him I was having trouble reaching my father and had some concerns, he took a breath, set down his pen, and looked at his desk for a moment. Then he told me that 6 weeks earlier, my sister had called his office asking about the procedure for selling inherited farmland when one owner has cognitive impairment. He had declined to advise her and had attempted to contact my father directly. The call went to voicemail. Dad never called back. Did you call me? I asked. He said he'd felt it wasn't his place. I drove home and opened the county property records site. The 40 acres were not listed for sale, not yet. But when I searched my sister's name in the state real estate records, I found that she held an active real estate license, obtained in 2022. She'd gotten it quietly. And when I searched her husband's landscaping company in the business registry, I found a lien filed against it 6 months ago for $31,000 in unpaid equipment financing. I opened the notebook and wrote for a long time. 2 nights later, Seth called again. A neighbor of my sister's, someone Seth knew from high school, had mentioned that she and her husband had been talking about buying a bigger shop building on the east side of town. Cash purchase. They'd been telling people they had a private investor lined up. I didn't say anything for a minute. Seth said, Dad, what do you want to do? I told him I needed to think. I sat on the back porch and went through everything in order, the way I would go through a fire scene, what I could prove, what I could see but couldn't prove, and what I only suspected. The survey map question in October, the walker folded against the wall, the waving through the glass, the real estate license, the lien, the cash purchase that didn't add up. I wrote 2 words at the bottom of the page, Adult Protective Services. I'd almost called 3 times before. Each time I'd closed the screen. This time I didn't. The intake worker asked me the right questions. I read from the notebook, dates, details, the photo with the walker, what Ida had seen and heard, the attorney's account. At the end, she said what I suspected she would. If my father told their investigator he was safe, and there by choice, there was nothing they could compel. I said I understood that. I said I wasn't asking them to remove my father. I was asking them to talk to him when my sister wasn't standing in the same room. They scheduled a visit within 10 business days. The visit happened on a Thursday. My sister was notified 2 hours in advance per protocol. When the investigators arrived, the house was clean, flowers on the kitchen table. Dad was dressed in his recliner, Walker right beside him. He told them he was fine. He said my sister was a wonderful daughter. He said he didn't know what he'd do without her. The social worker called me that evening. She said my father had full legal capacity and had clearly stated he was safe. She paused. When I was leaving, she said, your father shook my hand and held on to it just a moment longer than usual, and he said something. Another pause. He said, "Tell whoever sent you that the loading dock is always unlocked." I sat down. That was my father's phrase. He'd said it to me 100 times growing up. Whenever I was stuck on something, a jammed problem, a closed door. When you can't find the front door, go look for the loading dock. It's always unlocked. He meant, stop trying the door that's shut. Find another way in. He was not confused. He was sending a signal to whoever was listening hard enough to catch it. Seth drove up from Nashville that weekend. We sat at his kitchen table with both laptops out and the notebook between us. He had been running the numbers carefully. Dad's checking account. Seth was listed as a secondary contact for emergencies. Showed a pattern of withdrawals going back 9 months. Small amounts spaced out. $800 here, $1,200 there. 2 transfers of $3,500 each to an LLC Seth didn't recognize. When we looked the LLC up, it was registered to my sister and her husband. Seth slid the notebook across the table and wrote one number. $47,200. Below it, he wrote a second. He'd tracked material billing records from the landscaping company's county contracts. Materials had been billed to a residential address, my father's house. He underlined the second figure, $14,800. Together, over $60,000, 9 months. I filed a motion to be recognized as an interested party in any guardianship proceeding. The court granted it in 3 days. As part of that filing, I requested the appointment of a guardian ad litem, an independent attorney assigned by the court to assess my father's actual wishes, separate from anything my sister or I said. 1 week later, my sister filed for full legal guardianship. The grounds cited were cognitive decline, inability to manage financial affairs, and, I read this line 3 times, failure of other family members to participate meaningfully in care over the preceding year. I had called my father 54 times in the past 12 months. I knew what full guardianship meant. It meant she could sell the land, manage every dollar of his retirement account, and determine where he lived, without his input and without mine. What she had been doing quietly would become permanent and court-ordered. I asked her to meet me. I picked the Waffle House on Route 64 because it was public, and because I didn't trust myself anywhere private. She came in 15 minutes late, ordered coffee, and looked at me with an expression I recognized from childhood, patient, slightly aggrieved, like I was a problem she'd already solved. I had the notebook on the table. I went through it methodically. No heat, no accusations, just dates and facts. I told her I wanted to see our father. She could be present. I just wanted to see him. She picked up her phone and held it across the table. A video. Dad in his recliner, looking into the camera. "Vonda takes real good care of me. I'm doing just fine." His voice was flat in a way it never was when he called me. His collar was buttoned all the way up. I asked what date it was recorded. She didn't answer fast enough. I said, "Is that before or after his September appointment?" He mentioned it to me on the 7th. She set the phone down. The silence between us ran about 4 seconds. She said, "You call Harlan. That's all you do. You don't sit with him at 2 in the morning. You don't clean up after him when it's a bad day." Her voice had gone tight. "So don't come in here with your notebook and tell me I've been doing something wrong." I said, "I drove to his house in October. You turned me away at the steps." She left a 5 on the table and walked out. The guardian ad litem was a 63-year-old family law attorney named Agnes Poole. She had a 1-room office above the pharmacy on Main Street. She had been doing this work for 24 years. She interviewed my father at the house. My sister had the legal right to be present as the person named in the petition. The interview lasted 35 minutes. Her report came through the court file, 4 pages. Dad had presented as oriented, coherent, and able to articulate his preferences. He expressed satisfaction with his current living situation. Then I read the section marked additional observations. The subject wore a long-sleeved garment buttoned at both wrists despite an ambient temperature of 74 Fahrenheit. He declined when offered the opportunity to remove his cardigan. He appeared reluctant to speak, at length when the petitioner was visible in the doorway. And one more line. When asked whether there was anything he wished to communicate to the court, the subject paused for an extended period, then said, "I just want people to stop deciding what I want before they ask me." I called Agnes Poole's office that afternoon, she answered herself. I told her about the public event coming up in 2 weeks. Claymont Elementary was naming a new wing of its library after my father. 31 years of service, 200 people expected, local news invited, school board members in attendance. I told her my sister had arranged for Dad to appear and sign a formal letter of intent to donate a portion of the family farmland to the school foundation, with herself listed as a state administrator for the transaction. I told her I had bought a general admission ticket, my full name on the registration. I wanted my sister to know I was coming. Agnes asked me what I was planning to do. I told her I was going to ask my father one question, in front of whoever was in that room. She asked what the question was. I told her, I'm not going to write it here yet. It wouldn't carry any weight without the room around it. I'll tell you what I told Agnes. There's only one place that question has power, and it's not in a phone call or a court filing. It has to land where Dad can see that he is not alone when he answers it. She was quiet for a long time after I told her. You're not going to make accusations? No. No documents, no speech. No. You're going to raise your hand and ask one question. Yes. Another pause. I heard her pen tap against her desk twice. I'll sit in the back row, she said. Seth drove up the night before. We sat on my porch and didn't talk much. He'd been the one to find the financial trail, and I think he was still working out what it meant. That someone who'd been at every Christmas and every graduation had spent the better part of a year quietly taking apart his grandfather's financial life. You think she knows it's over? He asked. I said I didn't know. I said I'd seen people in burning buildings who knew the roof was coming down and still couldn't make themselves move. The gymnasium at Claymont Elementary seats about 200 in folding chairs. The library naming ceremony was a Friday evening, crepe paper in school colors, a small podium with the district seal, 3 framed photos of my father on easels near the stage. One from 1987, one from his retirement dinner, one recent photo my sister had submitted. In the recent one, he was thinner than I remembered. His collar was buttoned up. I was in the 5th row. Seth sat to my left. Agnes Poole was against the back wall in a gray blazer with a notepad on her knee. Ida was 4 rows back. When she caught my eye, she gave me a single nod. Dad was at the front table with my sister, her husband, and the school board chair. He was in his blue dress shirt, the one he'd worn to every awards ceremony I could remember, sleeves buttoned at the wrist. When he turned to scan the room, the way he'd always done at assemblies, a slow, deliberate sweep, his eyes found me in the 5th row. He didn't look away, he smiled. The real one, the kind that reaches his eyes before his mouth catches up. I put my hand up in a small wave. My sister saw me 3 seconds later. She looked at me without expression and turned back to the front. The program ran through its sequence. The superintendent read the citation. The school board chair unveiled the plaque. Then she introduced my father. My sister and her husband began to stand, one on each side of him, to help him up. He stood without them. He walked to the podium with his left hand on the railing and took the microphone the way he'd taken microphones at 1,000 assemblies. Like it was his. The room applauded. He looked out at the audience. He didn't say anything. The applause faded. 5 seconds, 8. Someone near the stage leaned forward. My sister began to rise from her chair. I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I raised my hand the way you do in a meeting when you want the floor. The school board chair looked at me, uncertain. I have one question, I said, for my father. The room went completely still. I stepped into the aisle, maybe 12 feet from the stage. I looked at my father and no one else. Dad, I kept my voice level. Did you ask to donate the farmland? 7 seconds. My father looked at my sister. She was very still, her face composed, the expression of someone working hard not to show anything at all. Then he turned back to the room. No, he said. One word, into the microphone, in front of 200 people. My sister said, Dad, you're confused, the paperwork. Fonda, his voice was quiet, I'm not confused. He put both hands on the sides of the podium. He looked out at the audience with the expression I remembered, from when I was 9 years old and had broken something, and tried to lie about it. The face of a man who has decided to be done with a particular kind of conversation. My name is Gordon Thayer, he said. 31 years I ran this school. Most of you know that. What you don't know is that for the past 8 months, I have not been able to answer my own phone, I have not been permitted to go outside alone. When my son drove 40 miles to see me, my daughter sent him away from the steps. He paused to find the next words, the way he always does now, patient with himself. There is a document my daughter would like me to sign tonight. I have not agreed to sign it. I did not agree to come here to sign it. He looked down at his hands on the podium. I want to go home, he said, my own home, and I want my son to drive me. The room did not murmur. It went absolutely, specifically silent. The kind that comes when 200 people understand simultaneously that something real just happened. Agnes Poole rose from the back row. She identified herself clearly. Guardian ad litem, appointed by the probate court, officer of that court. She said she would be filing a report with the judge that evening. My sister said, he gets like this, since the stroke he... Vonda. My father's voice through the microphone, not loud, the way he used to quiet a gymnasium full of children without raising it once. 3 months ago, you asked me for the password to my retirement account. You told me it was for an insurance transfer. I want to know where that money went. Her husband stood up from the table. My sister sat back down. The school board chair stepped to the podium and said she was calling a brief recess. The APS investigator, who had been waiting in the parking lot, per Agnes's arrangement, came through the side door. She looked at my sister, at her husband, and then at my father. Dad looked at me. I walked up the 2 steps to the stage and stood next to him. He said very quietly, I got your letter. I hadn't told anyone I'd sent a letter. 2 weeks before the ceremony, I'd mailed a certified letter to his address, not because I thought it would reach him unread, but because I wanted a postmark. A record that I had tried. It was 4 sentences. The last one said, I'm not going to push through the door. I'll wait for you to open it. She gave it to me with the other mail, he said. Thought it was nothing. He shook his head slowly. I read it every night for 2 weeks. I put my hand on his shoulder. He covered it with his own hand, the same way he'd steadied mine when he was teaching me to write when I was 5 years old. Here are the plain numbers, because you've sat with this long enough to deserve them. My sister's power of attorney over our father was revoked 11 days after the ceremony. Dad signed the revocation at Agnes Poole's office, with Agnes as witness. My sister was not in the building. The guardianship petition was dismissed. The court's written order stated that the petition appeared to serve the interests of the petitioner rather than the subject, and that the subject had demonstrated both the capacity and the clear desire to manage his own affairs. The forensic accounting came back at $47,200 withdrawn through my sister's LLC, plus $14,800 billed to our father's credit accounts through her husband's business. Total, $62,000 over 9 months. My sister was charged with financial exploitation of an elderly adult under Tennessee Code, a Class C felony. She entered a no-contest plea, 12 months probation, full restitution over 8 years with interest, and a lifetime bar from holding any power of attorney or fiduciary role. Her husband's landscaping company lost its county contracts. I want to be straight about one more thing, because I said at the beginning I would be. The prosecutor's office called me 6 weeks after the ceremony. They said they had enough evidence to push for the maximum sentence, 2 to 6 years, if I was willing to advocate for it. I drove to their office and sat across from an assistant DA who had clearly done this kind of case before. She had a legal pad and was ready to take notes. I told her I would testify to facts, I would not ask for maximum time. She looked up from the pad. I said, my father still wants to see his grandchildren at Thanksgiving. He told me that 2 weeks ago. He has every right to be angry at my sister, but he is 80 years old and she is his daughter, and he has to live with whatever I do in that room. He spent 31 years teaching kids in this county that accountability and cruelty are not the same thing. I'm not going to use his case to prove him wrong. She wrote something on the legal pad. She didn't say anything for a moment. My sister took the plea. I did not attend the sentencing. Agnes told me later that when the judge read the terms, my sister looked at her hands the entire time. The first time my father and I sat alone, no legal matter pending, no one else expected, was a Sunday in December. He'd put weight back on. He had color in his face. He was wearing a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, which I know sounds like a small thing and was not. He made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table. He pushed a half-finished crossword aside to make room for the mugs. I'd been holding a question for 7 years, since the night Mom was in hospice and I hadn't made it back in time. I'd been on a grain elevator, the kind of incident you cannot walk away from mid-call, and I'd missed the last hours. My sister had used it twice in the past year. You weren't there when Mom needed you either. I asked him if he had been angry at me for not making it back that night. He put both hands around his mug and thought about it, the way he always does before he says something he means. Harlan, he said, there was a grain elevator on fire and 3 men still inside when you called me. I told you to finish the job. He looked at me. You remember that? I did. Then you already know the answer, and so does your sister. She just knew you'd doubt yourself enough that it would work. He paused. I let you carry that for 7 years because I thought you knew the truth, and I didn't want to make more of it than it was. That was my fault, not just hers. I wasn't expecting that. I didn't say anything. We sat with our coffee. Before I left, he went to the junk drawer, the one that has had takeout menus and dead batteries in it since 1991, and came back with a key on a plain ring. New cut brass. I had the locks changed, he said. I looked at the key. Then I reached into my jacket pocket and laid something on the table between us. The survey map. The one from the filing cabinet, folded the same way it had been folded for 12 years, the crease gone soft with age. He looked at it. He looked at me. You held on to that, he said. You asked me in October if I still had it, I said. I figured you wanted me to. He picked it up and unfolded it slowly and spread his hand across it. The land, the fence lines, all 40 acres between us on the kitchen table. He slid the new key toward me. I shook my head. You keep that, I said. I'll ring the bell. You decide whether to answer. He looked at me for a long time. Then he put the key back in the junk drawer, and he left the survey map on the table, and we finished our coffee. It's April now. He walks the property line again in the mornings, slower than he used to with the walker, but he goes. A home care aide named Glenda comes 3 days a week. He chose her himself, sets her hours himself, and has already told her he'll cut back the visits come summer because he doesn't need that much help and he'd rather spend the money on a new raised bed along the south fence. He told me 2 Saturdays ago he's thinking about tomatoes, said he hasn't grown them since Mom was alive. I come on Saturdays, I ring the bell, he opens the door. Before you go, I want to ask you one thing. Type A or B in the comments and I read every single one. A. My sister should have done real prison time. What she did to her own father deserved more than probation, and the outcome wasn't justice. B. The outcome was right. Restitution, accountability, and keeping the focus on what Dad actually needed, not on settling a score. And if this story made you think of someone, a parent, a sibling, a phone call you've been finding reasons not to make, I want to leave you with one thing I know to be true. You don't have to be the loudest person in the room to be heard. You just have to refuse to disappear. Thank you for being here.